Hello and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. Today we're going to be discussing how accurate the new movie, The War of the Rohirrim, is to what is in the book. Welcome back, my name is Ben, I'm the librarian, and whenever there's an adaptation of a book, there's always this question that kind of comes around of how accurate is it? And that can be a difficult question for us to answer because it's not always just a straight, are these words in the book? Are these words in the movie? Is this character in the book? Is this character in the movie? It can get a little bit more complicated than that when we're changing mediums. But we can look at this a couple of different ways. The first one is, are there things that are in the book that are in the movie? And that's a form of accuracy. Are these things in the book? Are they in the movie? There's also, are there things in the movie that were not in the book? So are there things that are added into the movie that weren't there to begin with? And then there's also, are there things in the book that got changed in the movie? So they're still there, but they are changed. So think about the Peter Jackson films. The Peter Jackson films, there's a lot of things that were in the book that are not in the movie. Things like Tom Bombadil and the Scouring of the Shire come to mind as really big omissions, places where Peter Jackson just chose to take something out entirely. And that, of course, is for the sake of time. You have hundreds of pages in each book in The Lord of the Rings, and you have to fit it into what is arguably long movies, but not that long of movies that they could fit everything in. And also in the Peter Jackson films, we have things that are just changed from the book. We can think about most of the core characters have some kind of change to them, right? The motivations of Aragorn, the motivations of Faramir and Theoden, basically just kind of a decimation of the actual characters that were in the book takes place in the Jackson films. And so those are just changes. Those characters are still there, but they're changed. And then you have, are there things that were added in to this? And so in the Peter Jackson films, there's not a lot that got added in, kind of whole cloth in. There's a few things here and there that got added in. One that comes to mind right off the bat is the elves showing up at Helm's Deep. That just doesn't happen in the book. And it's relevant to this because we're going back to Helm's Deep as we talk about the War of the Rohirrim. Another example of an adaptation would be the Rankin Bass Hobbit. So in the Rankin Bass Hobbit, there's virtually no changes to the story except for some things that are left out. So for example, Beorn is just left out entirely. He just doesn't appear in the Rankin Bass Hobbit. Of course, that's to condense the film down as they're trying to make a cartoon out of it. And of course, in the Peter Jackson Hobbit films, there was a whole bunch that was added in, things that were not in the books because they were expanding them greatly. So things that weren't in the books were then added into those Hobbit films. So there's a lot of nuance in how something is accurate or how something isn't. And with the War of the Rohirrim, we're taking something that is really only 2.5 pages in the book and we're expanding it out into a 2-hour film. And so that is a big difference. You can read this story in like 10 minutes or less, but you got to expand that into a 2-hour film. So of course there were going to be additions. So I'm not super concerned about that as we look at how accurate it is. Right now I'm more concerned about whether or not the things that were in the story made it into the film. Because if they didn't, then I think that is a problem because there was plenty of room to add them all in. So let's take a look at this. I've broken down each piece of the story like by major kind of event that happens. And this can just be one line because this story is very summarized, but kind of each major event. And we're going to look at it and see if it was there, it wasn't there, or if it was changed. And the first thing I want to say is all of the characters that were in the book are in the film, except for if you consider kind of the paragraph that comes after about Freylof and kind of what happens with him in Gondor and Saruman. If you consider that part of the story, which they kind of incorporated in at the end, then there is the character of Beren, the Steward of Gondor. So he is a named character that doesn't appear in the film, but that is it. Everybody else does. So let's get started with Helm. Helm is there. Helm is the Hammerhand. He is the powerful king of Rohan. Then we have Freka. Freka is there, and we have this major event that happens. In the book, Helm has councils of his lords, and he calls them together, and Freka just kind of chooses not to come. That is in the movie. But this council where they do meet in the movie, in the book, that is one of these regular councils that is called by Helm, and in the movie, Freka calls it. So it's there, but it is changed. Freka, though, is a fat man. He appears as he does in the book. That's basically it. He is Rohan and Dunlending. That part is accurate. Now, Freka has a son named Wolf in the book, and that's what he has in the film. And Freka comes and asks for Helm's daughter, who is unnamed in the book, to marry Wolf. So that happens in the film, except for a little bit of a change where Wolf is the one who actually does the requesting, but it's under Freca's direction. The next kind of thing that happens in the book is Helm insults Freca. That's what happens in the movie. And then Helm continues with his council. That doesn't happen in the movie because Freca is the one who's called the council, so there aren't any other purposes really for the council to meet about except this one thing. In the book, Helm and Freca at the end of the council go outside. That's what happens in the movie, and they have a fight. But it's not much of a fight in the book because Helm hits Freca once and he dies. In the movie, it's changed a little bit. So that all happens, but it's changed a little bit to have Freca actually hit Helm first. This is probably kind of a Han shot first. They kind of want to not make Helm's character quite as just like cold-blooded as he is in the book, but that's that. It still basically takes place in the same way, and Helm then declares in the book that Wolf and his kinsmen are enemies of Helm. Similarly, in the movie, it's just a little bit different. He banishes Wolf, but Wolf and his allies flee either way. Then you have a 4-year gap. Now, I've only seen the movie once so far, so I can't remember if they say that it's exactly 4 years, but there's definitely a gap. And when you get past that gap of time, Rohan is in trouble. There are troubles happening. And they do show this in the movie, although it's kind of in a, maybe it's a weird way. For me, a little bit, you have like the Mumakil showing up and the Watcher in the Water. But basically, there's troubles, there's invasions, and Gondor can't help them in the book. Gondor can't help them because Gondor is being invaded by Corsairs. In the movie, we don't know what's happening with Gondor. We never see Gondor or really get any contact with them. But Gondor does not come to help. The reason in the movie, though, is that Helm won't light the beacons. He won't call for Gondor's aid. So that is a change. The result is similar, right? Gondor doesn't come to help them, but kind of the mechanism of getting there is changed. In the book, you then find out that the Dunlendings are gathering, and they find out that Wolf is their leader and that they have gathered in Isengard. This is what happens in the film. The Dunlendings are gathered to Isengard. Wolf is their leader. Of course, there's a lot of other things that happen in that whole scenario while they're kind of showing it, where Hera is captured and things like that. That's the expansion part. But the actual facts of the book do happen. And then the Dunlending army and their allies defeat the Rohirrim, push them back into a retreat where Helm has retreated into the Hornburg. This is what happens in the film. They get defeated, they get pushed back. Then you have Wolf taking over Edoras, which is the city of the Rohirrim, and sitting in Meduseld, which is basically the palace of the king of Rohan. And Wolf calls himself king. And this happens in the movie. It happens very literally in the movie, and kind of in maybe more of a ironic way than it happens in the books, where Wolf is sitting in literally Meduseld, but it is like burned down around him. And he's calling himself king, and he's clearly king of nothing. And so that is something that does happen. It's just shown a little bit differently than maybe you would have imagined it just reading kind of the factual line by line in the book. Then we have this note that Haleth, who is Helm's oldest son, died defending Meduseld. And this happens in the movie. Haleth does die defending Meduseld. It's a very dramatic scene, and of course, way more dramatic than it is in the book, where it basically just says that he died there. Then the book tells us that the long winter begins. That is exactly what happens in the movie. The long winter starts. It becomes very, very difficult for both sides to be basically living in this freezing cold and famine situation. That is what happens in the movie. We see both sides having a lot of trouble in this really cold and desperate situation. And then we have what's one of the biggest departures from the book, and that is Hama's death. So Hama in the book dies in Helm's Deep. He dies leading a party out in a sortie against Helm's wishes, and they die in the snow. In the movie, Hama's death is much more dramatic than that. He's killed in a hostage situation by Wolf. And so a very different change there. That's one of the two biggest changes to the story as it's told in the book and the story as it's told in the movie, from the perspective of leaving something out or changing something that is specifically stated in the book. That's one of the biggest changes. And you can decide for yourself whether you think that change was good or not, but the fact remains it was a change. After Hama's death, Helm becomes described as fierce and gaunt, and he goes out by night, and like a snow troll, he goes out and he kills the Dunlendings with his bare hands, and he strikes a ton of fear into their hearts. This, of course, does happen in the movie. This is what is happening. He goes out by night, he's disappearing, he goes out and he's killing men and he's scaring them. He blows his horn in the deep and men run from him. That is said in the book, and it is shown in the movie. But the change here is that in the book it says that they thought Helm was like a snow troll, and in the movie there actually is also a snow troll. So in the book there's this rumor that Helm eats his victims. When he can't get anything else, he eats the Dunlendings. And in the movie, they sort of soften that up maybe a little bit or give another explanation for that by actually having a snow troll there who does eat people. So that is accurate to the books, but a little bit of a twist to it where they actually bring in the snow troll. But the part about Helm going out and killing people with his bare hands, that is definitely something that is happening in the movie. And then we have Helm's death. So Helm goes out one night and doesn't return. And when they see him in the morning, he is standing frozen on the dike, and the Dunlendings will not come near him because they are afraid. This scene does take place in the movie. Helm does go out, fight on the dike, and he does freeze solid there. And so that is definitely represented here in the film. Then we get to kind of the end of the story after Helm has died. Winter breaks and Freylof comes down from Dunharrow, and with a small group of men, he surprises Wolf in Meadowseld and kills Wolf. Now this is the second kind of major change here, is in the movie, Freylof actually comes to Helm's Deep to save them and fights there, and Winter hasn't broken yet. He arrives during winter. And it's not Freylof who kills Wolf, it's actually Hera who kills Wolf in the film. And so that is definitely a change. And so Freylof along with Hama are the ones who get the biggest changes to their story in the movie. Although Freylof still got a lot of screen time for how little he's mentioned in the book. Still got a lot of screen time and a lot of character development. And then the last thing that happens in the book is Freylof becomes king, which is what happens in the movie. And then there's a little addendum there where it talks about Saruman coming when Freylof is crowned and offering him friendship and gifts. And this is what happens in the movie. So overall, what do we see here? Pretty much every character, pretty much every major event is covered by the film. They didn't go and leave a whole bunch of stuff out. So from the perspective of was stuff left out, this movie is actually really pretty accurate. More accurate than Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy is. Probably kind of on par with the accuracy of the Rankin Bass Hobbit. Now, of course, what we aren't looking at right now today is stuff that was added in, which is the majority of the film. From that perspective, it would be hard to say that this movie is accurate because so much of it is kind of made up around the central story that Tolkien told. But that may be a topic for another day where we kind of discuss the accuracy from that perspective. For right now, from the perspective of were things left out or were things changed, almost nothing got left out. And there were a few things that were changed. Only a couple of them were really significant changes though. And now I want to hear from you. Have you watched this movie? What did you think of it? What do you think about the parts from the book that were put into the film? Did you enjoy seeing those? Were they the way that you would think they would be represented? Love to hear from you down in the comments. Just remember to be kind down there and especially to respect those who have put their hard work and creativity and effort into making this film. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. Farewell wherever you fare. May your ears receive you at your journey's end.